Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest in our series of webinars. My name is Gabriella Goliger, and I'm the National Chair of Canadian Friends of Peace Now. We are partners to Peace Now, Shalom Achshav, which is Israel's leading peace movement and which promotes the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can find out more about us and, if you wish, support us with a donation by going to our website, peacenowcanada.org. We are coming together at a very painful moment in Israeli-Palestinian relations. A terrible news cycle of violence has broken out. I'm sure I speak for many, many other Canadians in saying my heart is heavy at the thought of the bloodshed and destruction that's affected both peoples. It's easy at these moments to despair of a solution, but it's precisely at such moments that we must not despair. For this reason, I'm proud to support Peace Now, which works so hard for positive change. I'm also proud to be able to present our guest today, Professor Yair Hirschfeld, who has been and continues to be a tireless advocate of peace. Yair Hirschfeld was a key architect of the Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations that became known as the Oslo process. Before Oslo, the very idea of Israeli and Palestinian leaders coming together in peace negotiations seemed impossible. Yair Hirschfeld was one of the people who made it happen through his behind-the-scenes work with both parties, and then his work as a member of the official Israeli negotiating team. Yair has continued his efforts on behalf of a two-state solution with successive Israeli governments and with Palestinian leaders and senior officials in the Arab world. He is an esteemed analyst of Israeli-Palestinian relations, and he has taught Middle East history for many years. As always, we welcome your questions and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And I ask you to please type in these questions using the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And please don't use the chat for questions. Our webinar today is being recorded, and will be posted to our website. Yair, before you begin your presentation, I just want to ask you how you and your family has been doing during these very hard days.
Yeah, I tell you, I have 4 children and 10 grandchildren. Out of the 10 grandchildren, 5 are in the area where rockets are going down and missiles. And they have to hide and wake up and run away and do all of these things, which are quite terrible. The other 5 are close to us. At the moment, we have our grandchildren from the south here in the north, and we have a lovely time together. So we hope, but they are going back tomorrow morning. And as long as there's no ceasefire, we obviously will be worrying. But we hope for the best. We can't hear you.
Please go ahead, Yair, now with your presentation. And thank you, and I'm glad that you are okay.
Thank you. No. We're trying to put, not the bigger tool. Yeah. So I want to divide my presentation into 3 different parts. The first one here on this seemingly constructive picture to speak about the concept of what is necessary to move the two-state solution forward. What what can be done and where are the difficulties. The second part will be to give you bad news and show that we probably have to wait for further deterioration of the situation. And the third part will be to think with you together what can be done. And I will try to tell you also what we are doing here. We are very active, and we would like to cooperate with you and see where we here from Israel can be supportive of your work in Canada, and probably also vice versa. If we look at the two-state solution, there are four basic points that have to be understood. What we can do now, and we might be able to do it relatively quickly after the ceasefire, also with a certain caveat, is Palestinian state building. You don't create a two-state solution on the paper. You create a two-state solution when you create the Palestinian functioning administrative structure, the physical infrastructure that has to go beyond area A and B, deep into area C. You need an attitudinal infrastructure of coordinating with Israel and with the Arab world. On the Palestinian state building issues, we are fighting. We have joined Israeli-Palestinian planning group. I can go a lot into details what can be done. There are some things that can be immediately done to upgrade the income of the Palestinian Authority, and quite substantially, and this depends a little bit on the United States control of terror money and control of the flow of money. But there are other things that can be done a little bit short-term and they're more mid-term. But on Palestinian state building, we have a wide range of activities that we are doing with the Palestinians, and actually with Dutch money, but in coordination also with the Jordanians and others. And on Palestinian state building, I believe there's a serious move forward is possible to actually build the physical infrastructure of it, which needs also the need to use the language of two-state solution, to change the rules of doing there are quite a lot of activities that are related to it that we're working on and trying to achieve. The second condition for two-state solution is to have a basic understanding what is necessary, not to finalize the negotiations between us and the Palestinians, but how to start negotiations, or if you want to restart negotiations. I was involved in the last 4 years in an intense track 2 activity with Palestinian leading people, which went towards President Abbas and went towards Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time. There was a lot of headway made. I must tell you that the experience is that when there's a change of government in the United States, the Palestinians normally go back on what they suggested before. I'm afraid also the Israeli government now would go back on what we suggested then. But we were very close to an understanding. We had a 9-point agreement that was conditional on quite a lot of understandings. But the understanding was that you have a paper that both sides can say either no but and move forward, or even better, yes but and move forward. It is a paper that the third party has to submit to us, and both sides can say, you know, we need the assurances and we need other things, and it's a basis for negotiations with the United States and possibly with the other quartet powers. But you need an understanding between Israelis and Palestinians how to move ahead. I would say that this is in the moment, it is very difficult to achieve. I don't see this is going to happen in the last in the coming 2 or 3 months, but it's an aim that we have to keep in mind. The third condition for moving forward the two-state solution is to understand the workable give and get. And we don't have a workable give and get. Part of the reasons for the repeated failures was there was a wrong give and get. I must say that it doesn't help much that I wrote this in 1991. The give and get is that the Palestinians need end of occupation and the state for themselves. And Israel needs regional security, normalization, not only normalization, but acceptance and legitimacy. And the truth is that if this is only a bilateral Israeli-Palestinian negotiation, it doesn't work. Because the Israeli side has to make major concessions that are irreversible towards the Palestinians. And if there's no give and get then from the regional part, it doesn't work, and it hasn't worked. And we have the chance to reset it. You have a very interesting paper of the Chatham House has prepared by Mr. Quilliam and some other another expert on how to use the Iranian discussions with Iran on the JCPOA, the renewal of it between Biden and it, how to use it in order to build a supportive structure on all sides. It is a gradual approach, and only a gradual approach can work, because neither side is going to agree on everything at this time, and you need gradual movement forward with an understanding in what direction you're going. And this also we have to work on, and we have a possibility to do it, but it is not a short, it is something that will take at least months, if not more than 1 or 2 years, if we are successful. And the fourth part is the one that we have to do immediately now. The fourth part is to understand that the two-state solution has to be carried by the societies, by the by the societies of both parts, Israel and Palestine, but not only Israel and Palestine, Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and others. We have a lot of Israeli activities going on. I will tell you later on that I'm working together with an organization called Darkeno, our role. We have 400,000 people who support Darkeno, and we address them all the time. And we have a full, complete understanding how to move ahead and how to face the right wing, how to deal with them, how to start to move forward with them and engage them in a dialogue that serves the national interests of Israel, but is part of moving to a two-state solution moving forward. It is a comprehensive program. We obviously, the recent developments that are terrible and Israel is burning in the moment, is that you will need a lot of internal Jewish-Arab dialogue, which is going on, but not good enough. I may show you afterwards, my sister has a major role in, she was a head nurse in a very senior position in the WHO, and she's organizing the Middle Eastern nurses of this, nurses of the Middle East, or seeking to see how to move forward in an understanding that you take care of the well-being of the people. There are many activities we can do, and we can discuss them and speak about them. Maybe I'll move forward to the next point. Now, I have to tell you about the bad news. And maybe I'll start with it and go back to that. You know, if the present situation, there is, the left wing is de facto almost non-existent and most likely will be very weak in the coming 3, 4, 5, 6 months and even later. We have a Kahanist provocateur, Mr. Ben-Gvir, who is a threat to every stability and everything. He's in the Knesset. If we go to elections, we are told that he might get 6 or 7 mandates only going alone. There's a major danger, and we need to not only to marginalize him, but to deter these people, to take action about Jewish terrorism. There is Jewish terrorism. There is Jewish militant radicalism that is as bad as Hamas or does things that are outrageous. He is strongly supported by Mr. Smotrich, who you see in the left, on the left side. And Netanyahu thought that he can build them up and use them, and then he can manipulate them. It turned out that he couldn't manipulate them. And we will have in the coming weeks and months, we will face a very, very dangerous internal political situation that won't be easy. And I'm telling my friends from the peace camp that you have to be very careful not to feed into their propaganda, which is partly done. And it needs a very, very careful discussion, but it needs a very serious discussion with people like Gideon Sa'ar, who's more right-wing than Netanyahu, but is a decent man. And they are decent. It sounds a little bit arrogant, and it's a terrible thing to do, but we have to speak to the Israeli pragmatic right-wing, the Israeli decent right-wing. My granddaughter, who is now has been conscripted again to the army, has told me something which is decisive. We wrote together a book when she was 15 years old. She cried an entire night when Netanyahu was re-elected. And then for 5 years, we wrote together a book. We went through all the issues. And when I speak to young people, I get her directives. And her major directive is to say, and it may be tough for us to hear, but what she says is, in order to legitimate our positions, we have to legitimate right-wing pragmatic thinking. And I can tell you, I'm speaking a lot to young people. It works. And we have to see how this happens. I believe this is relevant also for Canada. If you speak to the right-wing, to your right-wing Jewish community, you have to reach out to them and see how you discuss with them and come to them with a more or less consensual position on most of the issues and marginalize the radicals and the dangerous guy. Now, let me go quickly back to the first thing. The international community is not there. And, you know, President Biden, who's maybe wonderful, and surely is, he sent Hadi Amr out to make this happen. Hadi Amr is a very, very local car. You know, if he wants really to make a difference, he sent Hadi Amr out. It's a statement, you know, we are not serious. Don't do whatever you want and tell me what you're going to do. I can tell you that Ambassador Jerechian, when he was ambassador in Syria, he was asked by Secretary of State Baker to speak to Assad about the Persian Gulf War, and Ambassador Jerechian told Secretary Baker, you know, this is above mine, Jerechian's paycheck. And Secretary Baker answered, okay, you want me to speak to the president? And Ed Jerechian answered Secretary Baker, I'm sorry, Secretary, this is also above your paycheck. And, you know, you have to know these things in the Middle East. And so far it hasn't been used. Which has made things worse is that the Labour Party has created the terrible statement that the Palestinians are no partner, which is obviously not true, but they're a partner for better or for worse. And we have to overcome this and see how to deal with it. Can I go to the next point? Now, what needs to be done? Let me go into something and I'll try to tell you what we are doing. We have to put the Palestinian issue back on the national agenda. It is now, unfortunately, very much on the national agenda. I don't know how long it will stay there. And it will be only negative, or we can only do it permanently. The first thing is we have to face the Israeli right wing. I've been speaking, you know, they have delegitimized Oslo. I'm the Oslo criminal. I've been attacked on the streets by people of being a criminal, which is very unpleasant, to tell you the truth. I have gone to young people and presented the Oslo concept. And if it's presented in a clever way, when you really say this is all reaching out, we are not part, we cannot simply evade the Middle East, we cannot simply go to take us out to Canada. Moses would have said Canaan and Canada, but that's not the issue. We need to have a dialogue with the Palestinians and with the area. We can convince them, at least. I'm not sure if we can convince them, but what I got out of this discussion is that the Oslo process starts to become legitimate, and one understands that that this was done out of national Israeli interest, that they're legitimate, but they're reaching out also to the other side. And there are other issues where the right wing is right. You know, if anybody said that you give up all the territories and then there's peace and love and only love, doesn't know what he's talking about. And some of the right wing arguments we have to accept and to see how we deal with them. The major issues are related to security. On security issues, we obviously need also alliances and coordination with the Arab world. But we have to know the argument that if you solve the Palestinian problem, there will be only quiet is obviously done. You know, if you look at the Arab world is is burning in a quagmire and under a terrible situation. And to say this is all the fault of Israel is obviously nonsense. And everybody who knows the conflict and knows the area understands that. And this has impact on what we do together. I have, you know, in the last 20 years, I was the first in 1998 to bring, you know, we started to speak to the right-wing people. And some of them became more left-wing than me today, or seeming more left-wing, but we have convinced many people formerly could to be supporters of a two-state solution. And I can give you the list, but it's obviously Olmert, and it is obviously Dan Meridor and others. I believe that now in the coming 6 to 8 months, we can build within Israel a supportive majority coalition for Palestinian state building. Bennett has come out with a Marshall Plan for the Palestinians, and Gideon Sa'ar has come out with the need to narrow the conflict. They have used proposals we have developed with the Palestinians in speaking about that. They all are intended only for Area A and B. Doesn't make sense. They have to expand to Area C, but it has to be in line with Israeli interests. And it has to take basic Israeli interests into consideration. And there's much we can do. And if you want, we can send you quite a lot of material. We're working on a very coherent concept. It will be ready in probably 3 to 4 weeks, but good enough to move forward in the autumn. And there's much activity we can do. We get strong support from the Norwegians. The Norwegian peace envoy is a good friend of mine. And we get other support. We have some difficulties on the present Palestinian government, but there may be a new government coming that will be far more constructive to it, and we have to work about that. Maybe I move forward. We need to speak about the regional security. And this is part of what you see on the right-hand side. The regional is part of work that was prepared by the Chatham House, who speak about the renewal of discussions on the GCPOA. We need a regional security framework, and it has to go together with ongoing parallel, slowly, gradual improvements of security between Israel and Jordan, between Israel and the Palestinians, between Israel and the Gulf states, and so on and so on. And we've done a lot of work on many of these things. You have the American security coordinator in the area, who has made quite important moves in the last 2 weeks that are quite constructive. We obviously have to take care of Palestinian security, but it has to go one and one together, and we have to work with this. We are working with relations with Jordan. We have a right-wing guy who today published a thing that we have to cut off the peace with Jordan and make everybody an enemy of us. My reaction is that I come from Austria. If you have many enemies is much honor. It's not exactly a recipe for success. And we have direct contact to President Assisi, to the King of Jordan, and to the King of Morocco. All these issues can be supported. There are some help that we can get from you in Canada that is could be very useful, cautiously, and see how this goes on. But we can think of a process how to enable Middle East regional security process. Now, if you understand that the conflict is not a conflict between governments and not between the leadership, but it's a conflict between the people, on the people level, we can do a lot of work. I grew up in Vienna after the Holocaust, and I know what anti-Semitism is. And I understand what Muslim hatred is. I can tell you in Austria, the Muslim leadership is very moderate, and they are working together with the Jewish leadership. And I believe I can't tell you what is possible in Canada and not, but I believe reaching out between the pragmatic Jewish leadership abroad and the Muslim leadership is of essential importance, and it can do a lot of work. We can get support from the United Arab Emirates. We can get support from the Pope. We have a friend of mine who's a good friend of the Pope. There are many things that can be done. I can show you material that has been written by Muslims in Germany, which is all how to organize education, how to work together. There's a lot of things one can do together and think. These are things that are very practical and can be very of great importance. They won't show immediate results in the coming 3 months, but they will show results for the coming 30 years. And we have to speak about, if we go and speak to young people, I'm 77 years old, I tell them, you have to think, they are 18, you have to think where you will be in 40 years' time. I can tell you exactly where I will be in 40 years' time. So it is your responsibility, not my responsibility. But we need together a discussion how we are building the future together. We will have a paper we will have preparing a paper on the development of labor in Palestine and what can be done in cooperation with Israel and the area. The development of labor capacities has to build the future in the 40 years. They're very practical things you can turn out and that can be looked into by doing that. And there is a lot of experience in doing it. Only telling you if you look at the short term, people say also the Palestinians, you're the big guys and we serve you. The experience in Eastern Asia was that there would be subcontractors. First, the Indonesians and the South Koreans would become subcontractors to Japan, but slowly they would have an economic competitive advantage, and they would take over, and they would then kick the Japanese out. And in China, this is happening all the time. And this process we can develop and see that such a process can help in Palestine, and we can think of it and plan for it. And there's much that could be done with universities in Canada and other work. Now let me speak about the immediate policy goals. We aim to achieve a commitment for comprehensive Palestinian state building. I think this is not going to be easy in the coming 3 to 5 months, but if we look at the coming 1.5 years, there's much we can do. We need to adapt the language of seeking a two-state agreement. It's relatively easy if you support Palestinian state building. We have to change the rules. I don't have time to go into the techniques of it. But if there's a project-by-project agreement by Israel, it doesn't work. It has to be the chunks of Palestinian economic development have to be agreed at one time. We need to speak about steps to enable Middle East peace and regional security. And we have to design a concept how to restart Israeli-Palestinian peace. So now this is for you to say, but I believe the Jewish community, you play a leading role with the Jewish community, reaching out to the Muslim community with what he said, and the think tanks. I believe it is decisive to have an understanding of the past. Congresswoman Tlaib said, she quoted Peter Beinart, that he said, Peter Beinart said, you have to take care of the past, not only of the future. You have a wonderful work carried out by Khalil Shikaki, Shai Feldman, and Abdelmumin Ali Said about describing the Israeli, the Palestinian, and the Arab concept, how they view the conflict as the past. I think we have to teach this. This is a book that has to be taught in all universities. We'd be very happy to help in these issues. This is, I believe, what we can do to help. So I would say I would stop here. I hope I gave you enough to ask questions, to do whatever. Can you see me?
Well, thank you for that really interesting and important presentation, Yair. And yes, if you could take the presentation off so that we can now see you, see your full face, that's great. We do have a lot of questions.
You see, far more important than seeing me is to see my daughter, which is far more pleasant to look at.
For sure. I will no comment, but both are pleasant. Yeah. I would like to start. There are a lot of questions already, which is great. I'd like to start with a question of my own, which I hear very often leveled to people in peace now from different sides of the spectrum, left and right, and that is, but it's too late for a two-state solution. There are so many settlements now, and there's so much anger and hatred. And I think especially now in the context of the blow up of violence too, like how do we get back to a situation where there's some kind of dialogue? And so it's that. And but I also want to add, because there is a question, somebody wanted to know for you to explain what areas A, B, and C are. So in the context of talking about, is it too late for a two-state solution? Could you also just explain that to those?
It helps, by the way. The question of area A and B and C helps to explain. There was the second part of Oslo negotiations, which we opposed. We wanted to tell the Palestinians don't sign it, but that's another issue. But I can explain also why. But area A are the cities. This is about 14% of the West Bank territory. Area B are the rural areas. This is another 30% of the area. And you have almost 60% or 58%, which is area C. Area A is under full control of the Palestinians, also administrative authority and also security authority. Area B is under administrative Palestinian authority, but not under Israeli security authority. And area C is almost 60% of the territory where the settlements are. The settlements are not in all the area, these are under Israeli security and administrative control. And the short answer is, if you look at the territory, if you look at the territorial issue, that you have the Israeli settlements, you can discuss it takes 6 to 10% of the territory altogether. That means that out of the 60% of territory that you have in area C, about 50% have to be under Palestinian control. And then you have the discussion about 6 to 10% of the entire territory. So there is in reality, there's no real conflict about 90% of the territory of the West Bank. And there's no conflict about Gaza. This Gaza is obviously has to be part of the state of Palestine. And the West Bank has to be, in the West Bank, the real discussion is about 10% of West Bank territory. And on these 10%, you have to find the ways how to deal with it. We have a lot of ideas, but if you have 90% of the West Bank and 100% of Gaza, and the connection between the West Bank and Gaza, you have a Palestinian state. You need also the free exit and income and outcome. And you don't need, you need some kind of arrangements how to deal with these 10%. And we have 3 or 4 different approaches. One is swap 1-to-1. Another is we can have special areas. We thought, for instance, that you have Ariel is well, this is too quick, it will not happen now. But in Ariel is in the middle, it's in the middle on the mountain ridge, and it has, but you have a university there. A Palestinian friend of mine, I won't tell you his name, also he's a very important guy, told us, why can't we turn Ariel into Middle Eastern University for high-tech, where the Israelis can stay there and be part of working on high-tech and research and development, and the Palestinians will get the taxes paid and will get it. So there are solutions that we can look at, and there can be also retroactive things on the other side. So we have possibilities. There will be a number of Israeli settlements that will have to be relocated. We suggest they should be relocated in the areas, into the settlement blocks, because then they are more holy. And there will be, there are 1 or 2 areas who want to say we will stay in Palestine as Palestinian citizens. But there are ways to solve it. You cannot solve it lack of trust. You cannot solve it as not lack of trust. And if you don't build the basic substance of cooperating together, you need to have also serious Palestinian state building on one hand and good neighborly relations on the other, stopping the mutual hatred and doing this. And it's not an easy job, but it's something we can work on.
Great. What about the Palestinian call for a right of return of refugees to Israel within the Green Line? I think that's also a question that comes up very often. How much is that a serious issue?
It is a serious issue. It's a very serious issue. I can tell you that in 2000, when these discussions, when this was held, I met Robert. The Americans first went all for Barak and then all for the Palestinians. And I went to see Robert Malley, who was today is works with President Biden, then worked with President Obama closely together on this issue. And I told Robert Malley, if you don't solve this in a way that is acceptable for us, I will call a press conference and say, I asked our people not to support the emerging concept. So it is a major issue. It has to be addressed. We have a lot of knowledge how to address it. Canada played a very important role in dealing with the issue. It is an issue that cannot be decided by the leadership. There has to be some understanding by the leadership. You hear aeroplanes on our side. We have, sorry. And it has to be, the people have to be involved with it. And you have to work with the people. We did a lot of work 97, 98, 99, before the Intifada. We had close relations with refugee camps in Gaza and in Jenin. But it is a process that has to be done quietly and effectively. And it's not something that is going to be solved over one day or over 1 year. It's a process.
Yeah, there are quite a few different questions from different sides of the story here. In the context of what's going on now, does the conversation have to change at all? The fact that the conflict that is going on at the moment, the outbreak of violence, and also that has spread to the Palestinian street, the violence between Jews and Arabs, does the conversation have to change a little bit? And another question that's perhaps related, how much influence does Hamas have among Palestinians? How much strength is there still in the Palestinian Authority?
You know, if there would have been, I'll answer the second question first. If there would have been elections, our estimates, and they were quite built on polls, where the Hamas would get about 30% of the votes, and the three Fatah groups would get 25, 22, 28%. So it would be a 70-30 division. If we could come to a situation which presently is not likely, is not probable, it's not likely, might not happen, that the three Fatah groups will start to work together and build a united front against Hamas, there is much we can do. The situation is that President Abbas' influence is going dramatically down. He hates Dahlan, who's the other one, is another list. Nasser Kidwa is the third list, and Barghouti. They hate each other, one against the other, and each of them will probably play with Hamas one against the other. So Hamas is a dominant role for the present situation. If we don't move forward in a structured manner that is well controlled, we are quite for some time in trouble. The truth is we have Hamas on their side, we have our Hamas on our side. You saw Mr. Ben-Gvir, and we have to overcome that. I grew up, I come from a left-wing movement, the Shomer HaTzair, so I believe in the dialectics of history. The terrible thing with, Israel is burning, and what then the relations with Israeli Arabs we have to work on this tremendously. This is your first question. And there will be a lot of things will be done, and a lot of things are already done, but far too little. We need that the next government will take very, very serious measures on that. There will be strong force in Israel to do that. We need to reach out to both societies. The contacts are all there. It needs to rebuild trust, and there's a lot of trust that's been broken on the Jewish side. And there will be some need to reach out also from the Arab side to us.
I want to just step back. We had a couple of questions come before our actual session, and they both related to possible other kinds of solutions. One was, can there be a confederation that would achieve peace, but sidestep some of the obstacles of a two-state solution? So there's a lot of talk about that one. And then we had another question, well, about a three-state solution. Does there have to be a Gaza state, a West Bank state, and an Israel state?
No, let me go to it quickly. Gaza State and the West Bank State and Israel State, forgive me, is a non-starter, total non-starter. There's no Gaza political leadership, and no Gazan who's willing to give up the connection to Al-Quds, to Jerusalem. The Palestinians need, there's a Palestinian people. They have the tragic past of dispossession and dispersal. You have 70% of Gaza people, even more than 70% are refugees. there is no three-state solution. We thought once that there could be an Israeli-Egyptian, Israeli-Jordanian part, but this also doesn't work. The Egyptians will not go for it, and the Jordanians will not go for it. So forget about the three-state solution. They don't want it. And I must say, for Israel, it's also a bad idea. It would be a strategic liability that you play one against the other. And I think, I don't want to go into this too much, but it is a very dangerous position. The Confederation concept, if you look at the next 25 years, it might be not such a bad idea. If you look at the present situation, it's a non-starter. Confederation means an agreement between two states. So you have to first form the two states, and then you can go to confederation. You can't be the other way around. And now we did that. I had no opinion on the confederation some 3 years ago, and we checked it. And we had in-depth discussions with Jordanians, with Palestinians and Israelis. And the Palestinians saw it as another way of maintaining Israeli occupation. Most of the Israeli Jew, all Israeli Jews saw it as a manner to give up Israel's identity as Israel's right to Jewish self-determination. Only there was some support from Israeli Arabs. So the answer is, the part of the Israeli left wing wanted the two-state solution to forget about the Palestinians. This is not going to work. We cannot have a total separation, and we have nothing to do one with the other. The right wing has accused the Israeli left of being racist from this point of view, not without justification. So we have to find ways to work together and to cooperate and to coordinate, because we're dependent one on the other. And then there are certain forms that could lead to a confederation down the road, might be thought of, but definitely you can't start it by doing that.
Okay. There's a question about settlers. How do you rein them in and their supporters, the Christian fundamentalists? And I guess that also addresses the question, how do you marginalize the extremists? You spoke about it briefly, but maybe you could talk a little more on that.
You know, personally, I since 2000 work closely together with the former head of the settlement movement, with Othniel Schneller. Part of the dialogue that we did with the Palestinians on how to move a two-state solution was with him together. We need to take settlement interests into consideration. You can't, if you think that we are 600,000 settlers today, you can't, you know, no Israeli government can evacuate, definitely not 600,000, but you have the Israeli left-wing group, believe I cause damage, say you have to evacuate 40,000 families, which would be 160, 180,000 people. There's no government is going to do, and the demand for it is a disaster. The demand for it is only strengthening Israel's right wing and puts the settlers into the group of the marginalized people. So we have to reach out to the settlers and find a way how they can be part of moving towards a two-state solution. We have supporters of that on the West Bank, in the settlers. It's a long way to go. What I'm saying is, you know, if the American government would get involved in negotiations, the easiest thing what they can do is, and this needs more explanation, more detailed thing, but the Israeli side can go to negotiations on the basis of the Bush letter to Prime Minister Sharon. I will meet Omri Sharon in a month, and we'll speak about it, how this can be a united position. The Bush letter speaks about a two-state solution. And it speaks of taking care of very clear, legitimate Palestinian interests. But it also takes care of the interests of the settlers. There's no Israeli government that will go otherwise to negotiations. And the Israeli left wing has to understand that. Otherwise, you cannot marginalize the radicals. Now, I think you can start negotiations when we start negotiations on the Bush letter, and the Palestinians start negotiations on the Arab Peace Initiative. No Israeli government will accept the Arab Peace Initiative as it is. And we've worked with the Saudis, with others, in saying how you adapt it to present situations. And there's an understanding that you have to adapt it. But it is totally fair that you start negotiations, that one side negotiates on behalf of the Arab Peace Initiative and doesn't give up its demand. And we negotiate on this. And there are many things you can then do together. And then you deal how, part of negotiations, how do you deal with disagreement? And we have a lot of ideas how you deal with it. But this is more detailed and not the right place to discuss this here.
Okay. But there is a question that says that in a recent article, you talked about implementing phase 2 of the roadmap, and wants you to elaborate. And before you do that, just what is phase 2 of the roadmap?
The roadmap has 3 phases. Phase 1 basically says stop killing each other and put an end to terror, security, and create a more structured, functioning Palestinian government on the Palestinian side. Some of it is practical, some not. Phase 2 is create a Palestinian state on part of the territory. To establish a state of Palestine and negotiate from there onwards to solve the hardcore issues. The hardcore issues are Jerusalem, refugees, territory, and settlements. Let's establish the Palestinian state, have an understanding how you get on, and then you move to the third phase, which is actually solving the core issues of conflict. What we are saying is exactly this. You know, you started, we speak about the Bush letter, the settlements where most of them will stay. They speak about the 4th of June line with no exchanges. And then you move closer and you create a Palestinian state de facto, and you have an understanding how you deal with these 10% of disagreement. And these 10% of disagreement you can move. Now you have to agree on Jerusalem and refugees too. And you have to agree on security. And from a theoretical point of view, I don't know if you have ever read Paul Lederach's work, but we speak about conflict management, conflict resolution, and conflict transformation. Netanyahu's policy has been, which is shown to be not sustainable, conflict management. You know, it has been so managed that we've got this disaster now. The American position and the position of the original, also this included myself, was let's resolve the conflict altogether. It doesn't work. We are too far away. By the way, Yasser Arafat told me this to me privately in September 1995. I've got the wording of the meeting on it. And Sari Nosevi told me this even earlier. Don't go for everything at once. It doesn't work. So what we need is a process of conflict transformation. On Jerusalem, for instance, one of the things on Palestinian state building we need a connection of the West Bank to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem, the northern West Bank to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem to the southern West Bank of Palestine. You connect them. There are many other things you can do in Jerusalem that will give more trust and more confidence to each side. Well, there are conflict transformation moves. You don't solve everything at one side, but you create measures that build a different reality on the ground and make it then easier to solve it. It's difficult because the bad guys are out and you have to deal with the bad guys. And when the bad guys are out, you have to know how you do that. I always quote the Northern Ireland situation. In Northern Ireland, they decided to move forward without deciding where to go at the end. The one side said they want a united Ireland, the other side they want to be part of the United Kingdom. And it went wonderful. But when there was, after they signed an agreement, the Good Friday Agreement in April 1998, and in August there was the Omagh terror act, where they killed some 34 children in the kindergarten, then all of them stood up and said, we fight against terror. we go against terror and we will take action against it. And you need to see how you create the incentive for Israel to move ahead and come to understandings where the Palestinians will need understandings on all of these issues. And my understanding is that the Abraham Accords, the United Arab Emirates reaching out to Israel, has created what I've called the potential, not a real, but a potential Sadat moment, where we have an interest to work with the Arab side and work, and they are far more effective if they don't hate us and don't try to kill us and jump on the towers full of happiness when Jews are killed. Then there's a far bigger way to reach out to Israeli society and convince us to move ahead. I think it is possible. Not easy. Yeah. Okay.
What realistically, what are the prospects of a change of leadership in Israel, and how important is that towards moving things forward?
Tremendously important. The moment change of leadership is highly unlikely.
That was a short answer. Okay, that gives us lots of opportunity for other questions. Unfortunately, the questions are, as always, important and interesting, but they range around. So I have to look at, well, there was one that goes back and asks why did Oslo and Camp David fail? And I would add to that, what would make a new attempt be more successful? I think you've answered that to some extent, perhaps that you don't ask for everything at once, but maybe you could elaborate.
No, I've answered, which is not a fair answer. I've written in Corona time, I had nothing to do, so I wrote a book on it, and it will be published. It will take probably another 4 or 5 months by Fedfam as a Oslo. To tell you too long why I believe that Oslo didn't fail, let's not go there today, because everybody believes it has failed, and I would say the 5 principles that I laid down in Oslo are still true. But it's a long discussion, and but Camp David failed. Camp David failed because it was an everything or nothing. The negotiations were led in a way. If I would teach how not to lead the negotiations, I wouldn't get to the brilliance of Mr. Barak. They were led in an outrageous manner of stupidity. At the moment, if it's everything or nothing, you cannot get there. We suggested, we had at the time, we had concepts ready and agreed with the Palestinians that might work. In order to negotiate, we had 3 or 4, I'll give you 3 or 4, and there were even more. We had prepared, you negotiate, you build this safety network for negotiations. So we had an agreement on economic permanent status, how to do economic cooperation coordination. It was signed by 2 teams. It was led by David Podet, who led the Palestinian, the Paris talks, and on the Palestinian side, by Yair Hirschfeld, who was with me in Oslo. There was a complete understanding on doing that. We had an agreement, we had it signed on security permanent status, which was Israeli, Palestinian, Jordanian. They had a discussion with Arafat, and the speech of Arafat, which spoke about the moving from the logic of war to the logic of peace. In other words, a code of conduct that we had prepared with Hussein Agha and Ahmed Khaledi, and Arafat made the speech and used every word we had written for him. A week later, he went back on it, and the Israeli side didn't take him up. So we had three major stones that you build if you go to negotiations. You have an understanding. If you move ahead on that, you have a kind of what you call partner, you have a best and best agreement, best alternative to non-agreement. You have understandings on these three issues where you can move ahead, and then you negotiate the hard guys. But Barak did it exactly the other way around. There were other issues. The worst issue, I'll tell you the worst issue of it. So in history, certainly can say there was one day where everything went wrong. But in 1996, the Hasmonean Tunnel was opened. And we tried to at least come to an understanding between Faisal Husseini and the Netanyahu. It didn't come to it, but it led to a situation where the Palestinian police killed 17 Israelis and we killed 50 Palestinians. And the logic of both sides, the logic of the Palestinians was, if negotiations don't function, we can use violence. And there was a meeting between Dahlan and Nimrod Novik on the 3rd of February 1998, where Dahlan tells Nimrod, we negotiate, if you don't give us what we want, we will start violence. And if this is the position, you're not going to get ahead to understanding. You needed an understanding on security. You needed an understanding of code of conduct for them. You needed an understanding on the economic issues before in order to prevent it. And that wasn't reflected upon and wasn't solved. Now, if intellectuals know what to do and the politicians do the opposite, you feel like there's this Indian poison that you inject you, and you see everything better, but the torture hurts even more, and you're paralyzed and can't do anything.
Okay, we're coming close. I think we're drawing to an end to our very interesting time. I'd like to ask you a wrap up, another question now, and that is more general. What gives you hope? I bet you could probably think of the things that would be your worst nightmares, and I can think of them. But what sustains you? What has enabled you to keep going all these years, and what gives you hope now in this moment when it seems like everything's crashing around us?
Two very short answers. The first short answer: the Israeli miracle weapon in the 1940s and 1950s was Ein Brera. There's no other choice. And the second answer: I've got 4 children and 10 grandchildren. And for heaven's sake, I care about my grandchildren to be able to live in Israel, b'kavod, in dignity and respecting the dignity of others. And that leaves you no other choice but to work for it.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Yair, for sharing your perspectives, your insights, your thoughts, and I hope that you your perspective rules the day a little more than it is at the moment. But just one more thing though, in terms of hope, do you see signs? You have talked about Darkenu. I'm not sure that we know exactly what that is. Just tell us a little bit more about the groups that you feel are making some positive change or working in that direction. And I hope you agree that Peace Now is one of them.
The truth is that I'm very critical of the Israeli left. I believe that, I founded ECF, and I made ECF a big success. And 2 years ago, I left ECF, and I disagree with many things, part of peacing. People prefer ideology over pragmatism, and people are not willing to give up. From my point of view, even one settlement was too much in Palestinian territory. But I do everything to reach out to the Palestinians. I was told by rabbis, that I'm the Oslo criminal, but I reach out and speak to them. And the Israeli left wing believes, some of them believe that they're still in government, and they behave if they're in government, and they ignore reality. And I believe, and I will make this very clear, I in 2002 told Yossi Berin, who I respect tremendously, I told Yossi, this Geneva Code is the worst thing you can do. This will only cause trouble. It will only, you're promising something you cannot deliver. You don't have the legitimacy to promise it. You don't have the capacity to do it. You're dividing the Israeli potential peace camp, and you're creating demands on the Palestinian side, and no government will follow up. And it has become more and more true. I will be even more clear. There's a wonderful Palestinian, Samad Khouri, who in Ramadan I always go and speak with him. He's Christian, and I asked him, why, for heaven's sake, did you oppose the Olmert proposal? And the answer was, Geneva gave us 1.9% of territorial exchange, and Olmert 6.3%. I said, for heaven's sake, don't you know the difference between a small group representing 5 members of Knesset and the prime minister of the government of Israel? And his answer was, there were generals there, they're the deep state. But I believe that the demand, if you demand something and you fight for something you cannot achieve, you're going to fail, and you fail your partners. And therefore, I'm very critical of the Israeli left wing, and I'm not liked for being critical about them. They like to shut me up. So the answer is, we have to do a lot of work on the left. We need to, you don't have all to speak on one voice, but we have to have some kind of reality check. I've suggested, for instance, there's a wonderful young man who did his PhD, he did his masterwork on right-wing strategy. So listen to him, at least listen to him and see how they work. No. And many of these wonderful people in the peace camp have been in very important government positions. Unlike me, I never was in government. And they believe they can dictate what they believe should be done, and don't understand that they don't have neither the power, not the power, not the capacity, not the legitimacy to do it. And the discussion in the left wing is very, very important. You have part of the left wing who says, let's forget about the Palestinian issues, let's speak about women issues and economic issues, and this, most of the Israeli left wing. By the way, not Merav Michaeli, but the former leadership. You have others. You have this the Peter Beinart idea of a one-state solution is the most, the only will legitimize right-wing settlement activity and aggression against the Palestinians. And then you have part of the left wing who promise things they cannot keep. And my discussion with the Palestinians was also, I can tell you what I have a chance to achieve. I will never tell you more, but I need from you A, B, C, D. And if I don't get A, B, C, D, I will not be able to deliver. And the left wing, for many reasons, the dogmatic left wing, for many reasons, is not psychological, but otherwise doesn't do that. Sorry to finish on this not very happy note.
Yeah. Well, I just asked you about Peace Now, and you kind of went to many other, included other voices here. So, but I will have to close now. And once again, thank you very much for giving us such an informative and interesting lecture, and really appreciate your taking the time for us.
I'll be happy to take more time for you, see how we can do certain things together.
I encourage you in our audience to continue to support the organizations that you feel you believe in, and I hope that Peace Now is one of them. We entirely work with on a voluntary basis and on donation basis. So if you can support us, we're much appreciated. Everyone stay safe and well, and particularly you, Yair, and your family. And we can only hope and work for better days. And thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. All the best.